Well, my name is Johan. I'm one of the pastors here at Family Worship Center, and we're so glad that you chose to join us today. If you're joining us online as well, we just want to give you a special welcome, especially for those of you who are joining us for the first time. We're just so glad that you've taken the time today to be with us. It's so great to have you with us. Just a couple things before we dive into our talk for today. Next week, we're starting a brand new series on the topic of family. And we'll be covering some really great topics, some really relevant topics for family life and things that are really relevant for our everyday lives. And so we'll be covering some of this really in depth with our small groups as well. So if you'd like to get connected to a small group, or if you're even slightly interested in that, now is a great time to explore that. And so please, if you're interested, even slightly, come talk to myself or to Emma, and we would love to get you connected. Also, I want to let you know that at any point in our talk today, if you have a question, please send us a private message or email me at johan@whitecourt.church, and I'll do my best to answer your question later this week by posting a video or just by responding to your email. So please ask me questions, and don't be shy, because if you have a question, chances are someone else has the same question, and so please don't hesitate to ask. I want to start off today's talk with a story about a hockey player who's not your average hockey player. So if you're watching online today, I want you to type in your favorite emoji, an emoji of your favorite sport, okay? So it doesn't have to be hockey related, but any kind of emoji. Let's fill that chat with sports emojis together. On February 22nd of this year, there was a hockey game that was very memorable because of one Zamboni driver by the name of Dave Ayres. Okay, some of you have heard this story, some of you haven't, but Ayres is a Zamboni driver for the Toronto Marlies. The game was the Hurricanes versus the Maple Leafs, and after the Hurricanes goalies were injured, Dave Ayres filled in as emergency goaltender. Emergency support goaltender, and makes his NHL debut at 42 years of age. Can you even imagine how nervous he must have been? And his family, I'm sure they were absolutely losing it. I mean, can you imagine, your dad or your husband, all of a sudden he's playing in the NHL? Like that's just crazy, right? That's insane. So anyway, Ayres gets onto the ice and he starts making save after save. And people are just starting to notice that this guy is absolutely killing it on the ice. And people are starting to cheer this guy on. And it's just crazy because it's so unexpected that he would be playing so incredibly well. By the end of the game, Ayres had stopped 8 out of 10 shots and ends up helping his team win the game. Isn't that amazing? I was looking through some YouTube comments I was watching some clips of this, and I was looking through the comments, and somebody joked that Dave Ayres has never lost an NHL game in his life. Sometimes the most amazing things happen in this world through the most unlikely people. Today we're going to talk about how God chooses ordinary people to do extraordinary things. In fact, I want to take it even a step further. God doesn't just choose ordinary people. He often chooses the most unlikely people to accomplish great things. This morning we're going to look at a section of text found in the Bible in 1 Corinthians. And if you're not familiar with 1 Corinthians, it's a letter written by the Apostle Paul. Paul wrote this letter in the 1st century to a church in a city called Corinth, which is actually a lot like Edmonton in a lot of ways. There's a lot going on there, lots of businesses and trade happening there. And Paul had spent about a year and a half there in Corinth telling people about Jesus. And they eventually started a church community there where they gathered, just like we're gathered here today at the Family Worship Center. And Paul loved the church in Corinth, and he made a lot of great friends while he was there. After his time in Corinth, Paul moved on to other places to build other churches in other cities. But before he left Corinth, he started to hear about some problems that were starting to bubble up in the Corinthian church. And he wrote this particular letter, 1 Corinthians, because he had heard that this church was experiencing division, and there was a lot of conflict there over different ideas and opinions. And here's a bit of what he wrote in that letter. It says, remember, this is Paul writing to the church, he says, remember, dear brothers and sisters, that few of you were wise in the world's eyes, or powerful, or wealthy when God called you. Instead, and I highlighted this in yellow here because it is important, instead, God chose things the world considers foolish in order to shame those who think they are wise. And he chose things that are powerless to shame those who are powerful. God chose things despised by the world, things counted as nothing at all, and used them to bring to nothing what the world considers important. Now notice first, before anything else, Paul addresses the people of that church as his dear brothers and sisters. Now Paul wants them to know, he's been away for a while, but he wants them to know that they're like family to him. And that despite all the division that had been going on and a lot of chaos, he wants them to know that they are still like family to him and he cares about them. And I think this is so relevant for us today because we can so easily get caught up in our own ideas and opinions and we can almost start to shut friends out of our lives just because we disagree on certain political issues or whatever. And before Paul gets into addressing many other issues, he starts by calling the church in Corinth his dear brothers and sisters. I think we need more of that kind of love in our world today. Wouldn't you agree? Everyone is welcome in the family of God through Jesus, and we're brothers and sisters no matter what kind of issues come up that can easily divide us. See, one of the main reasons this church was, the reason that Paul wrote to this church in Corinth was because they were having a lot of issues and arguing over certain things. There was a lot of conflict. And one of the reasons for that is because after Paul left the city, there were other teachers who came to visit, and kind of like guest speakers. Sometimes we have guest speakers here today, and they would come through, and there was this guy named Peter, and there was another guy named Apollos, and they would start to compare these different teachers. And they would say, they'd start to compare and say, well, what do you think about that Peter guy? And, well, I follow Peter, and I think that his teaching is really good. And he's just a really cool guy, and I want to be more like him, so I'm going to follow Peter. And someone else would say, well, Peter's all right, but I'm following Apollos because I think that he's definitely the smartest of the bunch. And so they started to kind of rank each other, and then there were people who would say, well, I follow only Jesus, right? I don't need anyone else because I've got it all figured out. I don't need any other teachers. And so you have this tension between people because of all these different camps that they had created. And Paul, he says in his letter, he says, dear friends, I love you, but please stop arguing about who is better and who's smarter in the church. And he reminds the Corinthians here of something really, really important. See, the words that I highlighted in yellow there on the screen, it says God chose. And it says again and again, God chose, He chose. God chose to rescue each of them and help them start living a life with purpose, in spite of the fact that they were considered worthless people by the standards of the surrounding culture and the world around them. He chose them not because of who they were, but in spite of who they were. In other words, Paul says that there's absolutely no way anyone in the church can boast in the presence of God. We can't boast to one another about ourselves and our own abilities. I can't say that, God chose me because I was so smart. I figured out through science or philosophy or through my own reasoning how to get to God. I can't say that. We can't boast because God is the one who chose us. And it's only through Jesus that He made a way for us to be in right relationship with God. And there's no such thing as second-class Christianity. We're all on the same journey together. I often think of a plane, and I wish that I could sometimes afford to fly first class, because those seats are so nice, right? So comfortable that you can even, put them right back, and it's almost like, you've got your own personal space, and you got a nicer screen, all these things. It's so nice. But, I often think of like an airplane, and we're all in the same journey together on that plane. And none of us, the reality is none of us even deserve to even be on the plane. But sometimes we try to pick and choose who deserves to be in first class. And we go, well, I think that, this guy's really got it together. So, I think that maybe he should kind of be in the first class seat. I think he's really got it together. And we say, well, I think this person, maybe they're more kind of towards the back, right? Sometimes we try to pick and choose, and we try to rank each other based on how smart we are, or how successful our businesses are, and these kind of things. And Paul is saying, he's saying all this because there were people in the church that were starting to rank each other based on what their culture said was good. And they were starting to compare, how their businesses were doing compared to their friend's business, and compare their abilities, and even, how much money they had, and all these things. And they were starting to compare with one another. And that was causing division. If there's one thing that's guaranteed to suck the happiness out of your life, it's to compare your life to somebody else's. No, not only that, but comparison is guaranteed to leave you either feeling badly about yourself because you're comparing with other people who seem to just have such a better life than you. So you start to, you look on Instagram or wherever, and it's like, oh man, this person just has the best life, right? Like their kids are perfect, and they're always wearing like great clothes, and they just look so good, right? All the time. They're always smiling. Like there isn't a single picture where, something is slightly off or they're blinking. It's like everything is perfect all the time. And so we start to compare ourselves, and we start to feel badly about ourselves. Or, on the other hand, we start to compare ourselves to other people who we think maybe actually don't have it as together as us, and we start to kind of develop this sense of pride, and we start to compare and say, well, maybe I've actually, doing pretty good compared to that person. And either way, we end up with a damaging view of ourselves and others. Comparison is guaranteed to take away your happiness. And here's the good news. As followers of Jesus, we're all on the same playing field. God doesn't play favorites based on wealth or status or education or any of those things. In the church, what brings us together and what we have in common is that God chose us not because of who we are, but in spite of who we are. Because the reality is, no matter how great someone else's life looks on the outside, all of us are messed up in some way and in need of God's grace. I try to be a good husband most of the time, but sometimes I say the dumbest things to Emma. Can any of you relate to that? I've come to realize that no matter how much I start to think that, I have my life figured out, and, I'm actually getting pretty good at this whole marriage thing, I end up saying and doing some of the dumbest things, and I end up hurting her deeply, and other people as well. I sometimes unintentionally and sometimes intentionally, it's like, and that's what sin is. But sometimes we kind of do this, we just, I try so hard, but no matter how hard I try, I end up messing up. And I think that's true for most of us. And just to make his point, Paul wrote in his letter that God chose the foolish. But he doesn't even say foolish people in his letter. He says that God chose foolish things. And why does he write it like that? Well, he says things to remind them that before Jesus came into their lives, the world didn't even see them as people hardly. Many of them were among the least respected in society, and people who were really despised, and the kinds of people that nobody even cared to notice. So Jesus doesn't choose people based on their wealth or status or work performance or based on how smart they are, because Jesus doesn't see us the way that the world might see us. God chooses unlikely people like Ayres the Zamboni driver to accomplish his plan. Let me give you some examples of someone that God chose to accomplish incredible things. In the Old Testament, there was a man by the name of Moses. And if you haven't heard of Moses, he was a great and courageous leader. That's how many of us remember him when we read the Bible. But before he was a great leader, he was an absolute mess. Moses grew up in the palace and he was raised as royalty in Egypt, but Moses was a Hebrew. And when Moses saw a fellow Hebrew being beaten and abused by an Egyptian, he killed the Egyptian and he hid the guy's body in the sand. So he lost his temper and he murdered somebody. Like, it doesn't get a lot worse than that, right? So Moses was a murderer, but wait, it actually gets worse. Once it was discovered what Moses had done, the leader of Egypt, Pharaoh, tried to kill him. And so Moses ran for his life, and he ran to the desert and lived in the desert in hiding for 40 years because he was so scared. So he has a temper, he's a murderer, and now he's a coward because he's running away and he's hiding. But while he was in the desert, God spoke to Moses, and he said, Moses, I want you to lead my people out of Egypt. I'm sending you. And Moses starts making all kinds of excuses, and one of them is this. He says, Lord, I'm not good with words. You see, Moses had some sort of a speech impediment. He wasn't a very good speaker, and he found it very difficult to communicate at times. And this is the guy that God chose to lead his people out of Egypt and out of slavery. This is the guy, right? The guy who loses his temper, murders a guy, hides the body, runs away into the desert, and then he starts making excuses, and he can't even give a speech in front of Pharaoh because he can't speak very well. Now, why would God choose Moses? Well, I think it's because God cares enough to want to include everyone in his incredible plan. So he chooses Moses, of all people. In God's point of view, Moses was the person that he wanted to use to accomplish that task of setting his people free. And God accomplished great things through Moses. And Moses makes a lot of mistakes even later on in his life. So God chooses him not because he was an amazing guy, but in spite of who he was. Moses is a great example of someone who's very unlikely to get anywhere in life, let alone someone who would become a great leader. Let me give you another example, this time from the New Testament in the Bible. I was thinking about the types of people Jesus chooses and the types of people he chose when he was on this earth. And one of them was, his name was Matthew, and he was a tax collector. And in those days, tax collectors were the absolute bottom of the barrel. They were absolutely despised by everybody because they would collect taxes for the Romans, and so they saw tax collectors as sort of like traitors, like they would sometimes keep a little bit for themselves, and so they would steal, and they were absolutely hated by everybody. And then there was a guy named Peter who was just an ordinary fisherman. And fishermen, that was about the most common kind of job you could have in that sort of day. And they would fish at night and they come back and, they would stink and, nobody really wanted to talk to them. And then you have sick people, like there was a leper, and then there was Zacchaeus, who was like 3 feet tall. Okay, so it must have looked ridiculous. You just imagine Jesus walking around with tax collectors with him and fishermen and this little guy and they're just all walking around and they're following him. And you could just imagine how people are like, why would he choose these people out of everybody that he could choose, right? People must have laughed at them while they were walking down the street. And here's the thing, God uses those who are willing. God doesn't call those who are qualified, he qualifies the called. And Jesus is choosing you today. Jesus didn't go around Jerusalem, looking for the best and the brightest. That's not what he did. He wasn't looking for the top 10, most successful businessmen or the top 10 PhD students. He was simply looking for people who would say yes to him. People who knew that they were not sufficient, they weren't enough without Jesus. And Jesus is simply looking for people who are available and those who are willing. Has anyone here seen the movie Robots? Anybody? Yeah, a few people, a few of you have seen it. I love that movie, and there's two quotes from that movie that really stuck with me, ever since I heard them when I was a kid. But for those of you who haven't seen it, Robots is an animated film about this young robot who wants to become an inventor. He loves to build things and invent new things, and so he wants to become an inventor, and because he's inspired by this famous inventor whose name is Big Weld in the movie. Big Weld says this really great quote, and the main character of the movie, this young inventor, sees him on TV saying this, and he says, Big Weld says, "You can shine no matter what you're made of." I love that. You can shine no matter what you're made of. And that's how Jesus sees us. Jesus says, I see how the world sees you. The world might see you as insignificant or just an ordinary person. But I say that you have value. And I want you to join my team. I don't know about you, but I think that sometimes we start to believe these lies about ourselves that prevent us from stepping into what God really wants for us. Lies like I'm stupid, or I'm not capable, I'm a failure, or I'm too old, or I'm too young, or whatever, fill in the blank. But if you feel like an ordinary person today, or you feel like maybe you're even an unlikely person, like how could God ever make something out of me? Well, join the club. I want you to consider joining Jesus' team today, because Jesus loves to use the most unlikely people to transform our world. And if you're here today, or if you're watching online, maybe you felt like Jesus is trying to get your attention today, and like he's calling you right now. But maybe you have these thoughts, like you might be thinking, but Johan, you have no idea what my past is like, and you don't even, you don't know how hard it's been for me to get my act together, even just the last few weeks, and to live right. I know what it's like to feel guilty about your past. I know what it's like to hate yourself and to live with an overwhelming sense of shame, and to feel like you might never measure up. You might never get your act together. But let me give you some good news today. It doesn't matter what kind of past you have, or even what you did last week, or even what you did last night. Jesus is wanting to give you a fresh start today, and he wants everyone to join his team. All we need to do today is to ask for his forgiveness. Augustine once said, "The confession of bad works is the beginning of good works." If you're feeling heavy in your heart because you feel like a nobody, and you feel like you're carrying this guilt you feel shame because of what you did in the past, because of your sin, I want you to know that Jesus, he wants to give you a fresh start today. And when we ask for his forgiveness, he gives it 100% of the time, guaranteed. And you can start fresh today. And Craig Groeschel says, he's a pastor, and I love what he says. He says, Jesus didn't shout his love from heaven. He showed his love here on earth. Jesus is a real person, fully God and fully man, and he lived a perfect life. And despite that, he died a brutal and humiliating death on the cross. That cross right there that we have on the wall of our building. And we have that there so that we never forget what he did for us. And when he was on that cross, he took upon himself all of our sin and all of our shame so that we could have complete freedom. And he died so that we could live in right relationship with God and with one another. He did it for us. He did that for me. And he did that for you. You know why? Because Jesus cares about us and wants to be in relationship with us. So if you're wanting to receive that forgiveness, that fresh start today, and let go of all the heaviness and all of that guilt and that shame that you feel in your heart, you want to start living your life for Jesus today, you can do that today. All you need to do is say yes. Yes, Jesus, I ask for your forgiveness. I turn from my past, from all the sin in my life, and I choose to follow you. I trust you, and I want to give my life to you. I want to live my life for you. And if that's you today, I'm going to lead you through a prayer in a moment. So I invite you to pray that with me today. But if maybe, if you've been a follower of Jesus for a while, maybe for a few months or even a few years, for a long time, and you have received that fresh start, but you started to feel that God can't use you because you are whatever, fill in the blank. We've often started to believe these things about ourselves, and we fall into that comparison game of, that person is smart, that person can do it, but not me. I'm just not going to ever be able to measure up. We start to believe things like that about ourselves, and, I'm not as capable as that person, or I'm not as brave, or I'm not as experienced. Or like Moses, we just simply feel unqualified. And if that's you today, I want to remind you that God can use every mistake, every regret, and every insecurity for good and for his glory to accomplish his purposes through us. So here's what I want to do today. I want us to each just take a moment right now and just close your eyes. And don't worry about who's around you. Just close your eyes, and I just want you in your heart to ask God this question. Just ask him, how do you see me? Ask him, maybe it's one word. What's one word you would use to describe how you see me? It might be, I'm loved, or I'm forgiven. Whatever it is, I just want you to take that moment right now and ask God how he sees you. And the word that God gives you will be an encouraging word. It's not going to be something negative, okay? So it's going to be an encouraging word, so I want you to just take that moment. I'll just give you a few seconds here. Now, if a word or a phrase popped into your mind, I want you to hold on to that. And I'd like you to pull out your phone right now, write it down, either in a note, or you can set a reminder for yourself. I like to do this, set a reminder in your calendar where it will pop up on your phone And it's just a reminder that says, God said this, I am loved, or I am forgiven, I am chosen. Whatever word popped into your mind. And just put that in your phone right now so you have it. And if you're not big into technology, you can write it down on a sticky note at home and put it on your bathroom mirror or wherever you'd like to put it so you can see it every day. And just be reminded that that's how God sees you. Let's do that together this week and just be reminded of who we really are in Jesus and how he sees us today. And for those of you who this is your first time, you're visiting with us or you're watching online and you'd just like to give your life to Jesus today, you want to choose to follow him and leave your past behind, I'm going to pray now, and so I invite you to join me as we pray together. Jesus, I thank you for the fresh start that you give to each of us. Lord, it doesn't matter what our past looks like, what we did last week, or what happened yesterday. What matters to you is right now. And God, I pray that you would forgive me. Forgive me of my sin. Forgive me of my past where I've hurt others, where I've acted in a way where I know I was turning against what you say is good and how you love people. Jesus, we thank you that you died on that cross for us, that cross that we have here on the wall of our building, so that we never forget what you did. You died for us so that we could have freedom from our guilt, from our sin, from all our past, Lord, and that just by believing in you and receiving your forgiveness right now, we can start fresh, and start living a life for you. So Lord, we say yes to you today. I say yes to you again today. I pray that you would forgive me for falling short so many times. And I thank you that you choose people just like me, just an ordinary guy, to accomplish great things. Lord, I pray that you would come into my life right now. Lord, I pray that you would give me a fresh start today. I want to live for you. I want to follow you. In Jesus' name, amen.